serve my fiendish patron.
Well, I serve my celestial patron.
Warlocks have some pretty wicked spells.
Warlocks have some awesome cantrips.
Wicked spells.
Awesome cantrips.
Wicked spells.
Awesome cantrips!
Alright, let's just talk about playing Warlocks in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and as usual, I'm hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted.
Maybe it's your first time visiting Ted's Basement. It's a place where we like to discuss news, views, and homebrews for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Sometimes we even talk about other role-playing games.
So if you don't want to miss a single video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and to tune to that notification bell.
Before we get into today's video, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Nord Games, and the ultimate guide to alchemy, crafting, and enchanting for 5th edition. This book is jam-packed with loads of things and rules specifically guided towards alchemy, crafting, and enchanting. But it doesn't stop there. Over 200 magic items are included, and if you don't want to get the books, you can dive right in and just get those magic items via their card decks. You can specialize in any format that you choose, picking them. Incorporated in these rules, it looks to be subclasses dedicated to alchemy, crafting, and enchanting. I think this looks amazing. I have already backed. As I'm recording this, they're nearly at 300% funded. Stretch goals are already being unlocked. It's amazing. There is no reason you shouldn't want to add this to your game. So support the channel by helping out our sponsors. Check out that link down in the description below.
Alright, so we're going to be talking about 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, the Warlocks.
We said a while ago that we were going to revisit the classes, so here it is. We're going to start off with a Warlock.
Okay, so first of all, Warlock is a character class that has their power bestowed upon them. They don't train. Maybe they went and found a ritual to contact a greater power or greater being to make a pact with, but for the most part, they just get the goodies.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. They could have, you contact the creature, or, patron could see some potential in you, and they could reach out and be like, hey, look, I'm going to offer you this deal, and you can take it or not.
And in some cases, sometimes the Warlock patron will even give you the power without knowing it.
Well, that has happened as well. So, Warlock is a unique class within 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. There isn't another class archetype that fits what it is that they do. They're not, they're not a pure caster. They're not a half caster or a third caster like some of the others. They have their own unique spell progression. And that makes them stand out from the other classes.
They kind of do their own thing. Warlock first appeared in Dungeons & Dragons towards the tail end of 3rd edition. Was put into the Player's Handbook in 4th edition, and then again in 5th edition. It's been widely popular. It's one of the favorite classes. We know when we do videos on Warlocks, we get way more people stopping in to check it out than any of the other classes. So they are definitely popular.
I would have to agree. And they offer, as I said, they're unique in their build. And, with that comes all the different stuff that they get. They are unique because they not only choose a Pact boon, but a patron as well. So their archetype is actually kind of split between these two abilities, and then they get their invocations beside, so they are highly customizable.
So for hit points, they're going to get a D8. For their proficiencies, they are proficient in light armor and simple weapons.
They're gonna get, like many other classes, a choice of 2 skills from their list. And that list is Arcana, History, Deception, Intimidation, Investigation, Nature, and Religion.
Their good saving throws are going to be Wisdom and Charisma. Makes sense, they're Charisma casters. And,
they need to be, pretty with it upstairs.
Now, we get 6 subclasses for the Warlock. 3 of them appear in the Player's Handbook, and that is the Fiendish Pact, the Great Old Ones Pact, and the Archfey Pact.
That was the small book that was released, not too long later, the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, and that released the Undying Patron.
And then in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, we got the Celestial as well as the Hexblade. So, I mean, going into them really quick, Archfey is really simple. It is, you have basically made a deal and have brooked with a creature from the Feywild, but a greater being, possibly from one of the Seelie or Unseelie courts.
You know, the fiendish patron, you know, you have made a pact with a creature from the lower planes. You're talking about one of the greater devils or greater demons. And, you know, they give in the player's handbook some specific examples of things that you could possibly, you know, serve.
The great old ones. Now we're looking at possibly, you know, great Cthulhu himself or an elder god.
And if you go with the celestial, you're talking about, you know, serving, you know, these greater angels and beings. You know, probably not the gods themselves, but they're lower tier.
They mention a Chiron, Solar, Empyrean are all possibilities. Hexblade is a little weird, and this one is a little amorphous. It's like you may have a pact with a sentient weapon somewhere. It may actually, which may actually just be a proxy for the Raven Queen. Right. It does mention a bit about the plane, the Shadowfell, and maybe a creature from there. That one is a little bit odder in who you actually are serving and a little bit more obscure.
So the Undying is a little bit odd. You know, it's all about, you know, staving off the effects of death. So you're going to wind up serving masters like, you know, the Lich Queen, Vlaakith, Vecna himself, or beings of that kind of power and magnitude that have already shuffled off their own mortal coil and have gained enough power beyond death to offer out Warlock packs.
I would say not greater undead, but the greatest of undead is where you're kind of looking there.
You know, which is amusing because, like, when you actually look at their power builds, it seems like, all right, this could be a positive thing. Like, I'm doing things to stave off death and, you know, heal myself. But like, we're talking about these greater powers of undead that are incredibly evil. So
essentially, when picking your subclass for Warlock, you can almost tie it to a plane that you want to serve, right? Do you want to serve, you know, the Feywild, the Shadowfell, the Hells, the Heavens? You know, or, you know, someplace steeped in negative energy.
So this is going to inform, you know, who your master is and how you wind up role-playing your character.
You can play either with or against type. You know, you may have found that you've entered this bargain and it no longer suits you. You're not feeling it anymore. Or maybe you embrace it the whole time.
In ages past, you know, you have had the reluctant clerics. Well, you could easily just as much play the reluctant warlock. Well, I've got this power, not really happy with it. Maybe you have a hard time controlling it, and you don't want to do these, you know, darker things. But, you know, as the patron directs you in certain ways, you fight back and, you know, you fight against. But the whole time, you out of game want to play a warlock because you like their powers.
I instantly think of characters like Ghost Rider and John Constantine when I think of warlocks, if you're looking for kind of like a more modern analogy. So now let's kind of like delve into, so one of the things you mentioned early on is you're going to get to pick Pact boons, but even before we get to the Pact boon itself, we're going to get spellcasting and we're also going to get invocations.
So spellcasting, as I stated, you know, they differ from the other spellcasters. They get a limited amount of spells that they can cast and a limited number of spell slots that they get each day. But their spell slots reset on a short rest, but they don't get a lot of them. They max out at a total of 4 spell slots. But again, you know, they come back after a short rest. But as you level, you know, those spell slots, all of them level up. They start off at level 1 and eventually end at level 5.
Right, so as you level your Warlock, you're not going to have multiple level spell slots. You only have 1 level of spell slots, and it is a maximum that you can cast. So they greatly benefit when they cast their spells from any kind of spell that has the ability to be cast at a higher level. Their spells are always the most powerful that they can cast, which is an interesting aspect of the Warlock, and the fact that you said, like you said, with Pact magic, it resets on a short rest.
They start off getting 2 cantrips, and by the end, they know 4. cantrips are a unique type of spell that don't occupy a spell slot when cast. Therefore, you can cast it every round as you see fit.
Yep, basically at will. And then, warlocks have spells known, so they can select their spells when they level up. They can also swap out spells when they level up as well, but they max out at 15 spells.
Which, sounds like a lot, and, when you compare it to other casters, it's somewhat lower, than others. So that can be a deficit. But when you're only casting 4 spells per rest, 15 is a pretty good choice.
So next up, we're going to move into our Eldritch invocations, and I feel like this is one of the areas where you can really customize and make different types of warlocks. This is going to be kind of like your bread and butter.
So from the 2 books, Xanathar's Guide to Everything and the Player's Handbook, we have a total of 46 invocations to choose from. That's quite a lot. There's some that augment your skills, some that augment your spells, some that augment your Pact boons, and, other abilities. But it's a wide array of abilities that you have to expand your character.
So by the time you max out, you're going to have 8 invocations that your character can know. Again, these can also be swapped out when you gain a level. So if one no longer suits you, or if you really had an eye on a different one and you don't get invocations this level, you could swap out one of your other ones to get the one that you really wanted.
Yep, it's a placeholder for now. I'll take this ability, and Warlock just seems to be like very customizable in a piecemeal kind of fashion.
Many of the invocations have prerequisites depending on certain factors. What is your Pact boon? What kind of patron do you have? What level are you? And some have none at all.
Right. So there's 13 that are going to give you basically a spell that you can cast at will.
Interesting enough, most but not all of the Eldritch invocations, when it comes to spells, the at-will ones tend to be things that you do to yourself. The other ones that are either adding a spell to your spell list or you get one casting per long rest, those tend to be something you do to others.
Right. There's 5 that are going to enhance your Eldritch Blast cantrip. It's a very, very large staple of the Warlock is Eldritch Blast.
Then we have 2 that are going to enhance your Hex ability, which is another kind of staple of the Warlock that is tied to your spell casting, and it hexes a spell, or your Curse feature, which currently there's only one subclass that gives you the Curse feature, and that is the Hexblade.
Overall, there are 9 that are Pact boon specific. There's 4 for the blade, 3 for the chain, and 2 for the Pact of the Tome.
Speaking of those packs, you mentioned it earlier, we brought it up earlier, but one of the choices you get at 3rd level is to pick your Pact boon. Currently there are 3. There was a 4th one introduced in UA, but we're not going to get into that until it becomes official.
Right.
So you can go with Pact of the Blade, Pact of the Chain, or you can go with Pact of the Tome.
So if you're looking at Pact of the Blade, this is for someone who wishes to combine, martial power with your spellcasting power. The term is generally termed as a gish. You get access to being able to create a weapon in your hand that, regardless of all else, you are proficient with it, and you can attack with it. It's a pretty cool feature. Pact of the Chain gives you the ability to cast Find Familiar and essentially shackle this creature to you, and you get advanced options as opposed to what the normal wizard gets with Find Familiar. And in Pact of the Tome, you get a Book of Shadows, which gives you access to new cantrips.
Yes, worth mentioning with that Pact of the Blade, that's a magic weapon, so for overcoming magic resistance for creatures. Also, you can also take a magic weapon that isn't sentient or an artifact and turn that into your Pact weapon as well. And one of the cool things is when you send it to the other place in extra-dimensional space, it's safe and just waiting for you to call it back to your hand.
So it is fun to be able to just be like, I'm going to summon the weapon to my hand as I get ready to attack. It's a fun thing. I've played Warlocks, and I enjoy that aspect.
One of the things worth mentioning, too, about your otherworldly patron is at certain levels, you're going to gain abilities that aren't part of the core Warlock class, but the subclass itself. 1st level, 6th level, 10th level, and 14th level are all going to be patron-dependent abilities that you're going to get.
All classes in 5th edition have this structure, but what levels they get them are dependent upon the core class. At 11th level and beyond, the Warlock further deviates from other casters, getting the ability called Mystic Arcanum. They get access to the higher level spells, getting a 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th level spell spaced around the same time that other casters would be getting access. But they don't ever gain a spell slot. They don't have spells known. They gain a free casting at the according levels of one specific spell they choose when they get that Mystic Arcanum.
And then finally, 20th level, the capstone ability for the Warlock is they can take a minute and regain their Pact magic, all those spell slots back that they had used prior. And they can do this once per long rest.
You can do it once per long rest, and that is where it is a severe deviation, and why the Mystic Arcanum is not a spell slot, because these do not come back. It is only those, at max, those 4 spell slots.
Now, let's kind of get into it. Like, we've been playing 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons now for over 5 years. And, so we've had some time to see a lot of Warlocks in our games, maybe even play a few Warlocks, and to see what we think about them. We've talked about this character class way back when, in the beginning. The one thing that we can always agree on, I feel like, is it's very thematic, it's flavorful, and there's a lot of roleplay potential just built into and baked into this character class. There's also a lot of room to have kind of your class itself provide a lot of adventuring hooks for a campaign.
So let's tie into each of these things. Number one, the role playing aspect when it's class driven, I think is a powerful mechanic. It's one of the reasons why I have throughout the editions loved Cleric, because it builds in, hey, I've got something that I already have these things that I care about, so I want to be able to build upon them. It's not a crutch, it's a tool that I can use whenever there's nothing else going on. Well, what would my character do? Oh, is there something related to his faith that I could, do, correct, fix, whatever have you? The Warlock could be along those same veins. Whether you're going with the reluctant Warlock where you are attempting to fight your own shackles, or whether you're trying to work on secret missions and be the hero while still trying to help out your patron by doing these, somewhat dark acts or whatnot.
Now, playing a Warlock is really tricky mechanically, because it has some things that are really cool about it, but it also has some things that are kind of boring and have this sameness to them. A lot of the Warlocks that I've seen presented in games look the same, because if you want to build an effective character in combat, and let's face it, a lot of combat happens in D&D, it's a big part of the game, it's going to be based around something that's reliable. Your spells are not reliable because you get them so few. You're going to max out at 4. Takes a while to get all 4 of them. Literally in the first couple rounds of combat, you could be tapped out and be done with spell casting, until you get a chance to rest. And depending on what kind of game you're playing, if you're not taking a lot of rest, they're not going to refill. So what happens? My experience is the Warlock ends up leaning on Eldritch Blast because, one, it's a really good cantrip, and then you can combine it with the different Eldritch invocations, making it even better.
And even so much so, you can augment it even further with feats.
Yes, but what's the problem with this? Well, the problem is all your Warlocks are doing the same thing, and in combat it's like, well, what's the Warlock going to do? They're going to Eldritch Blast. And one of the things that makes the Warlock cool and interesting is invocations, but if you then tie them all to Eldritch Blast, then your character becomes less interesting.
You're further pigeonholing your character into, I cast Eldritch Blast.
Now, I've seen Warlock fanboys online be like, well, no one gives the fighter a hard time for swinging their sword again. But with the fighter, it's a little bit different in the sense that you can have different fighting styles, and I don't mean the choice that you make when you pick when you pick that class ability, that class feature. Uh-huh. What I mean is you can be a sword and board fighter. You can be a kind of like a 2-weapon fighter like the rapier and Nerdarchy if you want it. You could be an archer. You could be a great weapon fighter. And then there's different ways to customize each of those fighting styles. And then the subclass abilities themselves actually add on to your fighter, making those choices even more interesting. But the Warlock doesn't have that. If their subclass choices did something different to their Eldritch Blast, at least if nothing else, the subclasses would make Eldritch Blast different. But that doesn't happen at all. Where the fighter is augmented by their subclasses and feat choices a lot of times. There isn't many feat choices that are going to augment your Eldritch Blast. It would have been more interesting if they would have had more choices than just Eldritch Blast. Especially when a lot of their abilities, they're going to use them, and then you have to wait to reset to use them again.
I also feel that the fact that Eldritch Blast does force damage makes it shine brighter because force is, so rarely resisted. And that just makes it that much more of the shiny target that a first level character wants to take. And then when you couple that with the fact that as opposed to it being one blast that gains in damage, they get multiple uses as they gain levels. It's like, okay, well, that now gives me more chances of missing, but more chances of critting.
But, not only that, though, then you pair it with another key ability, or spell, I should say, for the Warlock Hex, right? Each blast gets a Hex bonus on it, so it's a die 10 plus a die 6, plus agonizing blast, then adds your modifier onto it. So it is really good because you are rolling a lot of dice, and the more dice you roll, the better it is when you do crit, because then you're rolling more dice to add to your crit damage. So that is the problem that I see with it. Now, Eldritch Invocations, if you move away from Eldritch Blast, then you can make a really different kind of Warlock that's fun. But they're going to be more focused on the exploration and the social aspects of the game, which, they're not as bright and shiny. You're not going to get as much recognition for doing that a lot of times during the game as the person who just shut down the big bad.
Right. So I would say, if you're going to build a Warlock, to really look into what are the archetype features, what your otherworldly patron is bestowing upon you. Choose your invocations and your spells that really, fit that thematic, character, and decide, really how much do you require Eldritch Blast? Do you have another option that you can play with? And try to make something that is interesting and going to stand out rather than using that yield staple of, I cast Eldritch Blast.
I mean, it does get a little bit easier to do a Gish with the Hexblade. There's things that make you incredibly effective as a Hexblade when you start combining Hexblade and the other powers and your Eldritch Invocations. We've seen them be fairly effective in our own games. But again, too, you're also the Hexblade has this one really cool ability that they get to use once per rest, so it requires it to reset. And not only that, it's you're going to be picking one target in a combat, and you're going to be really cool against that one person. But also, now, again, that ability is also equally effective if you use a sword, or a weapon, or if you use Eldritch Blast. And Eldritch Blast still tends to be better. Right. So we come back to, what are you going to do? I mean, it's a meme for the love of God now, right? Warlock, say it, Eldritch Blast. And unfortunately, I would just like to see some more design options, as the game progresses. But we're 5 years in,
right,
and we really haven't seen much to be okay, you're going to get to do other things than this one cool cantrip.
So with the Warlock, if you don't want to focus on Eldritch Blast, you could dabble in other classes and say, well, I'm going to multi-class and see what other powers that I get and see how they're going to mix with Warlock so that you're not leaning on this cantrip that, has had so many memes created on it. So I had made a character, where I made a paladin and warlock, and I served, the Path of the Ancients and the Archfey, patron, and I'm look, they're both Fey, I'm serving the same thing. It's one patron, and this is just the order that I belong to, and it's different than your typical paladin order, whatever. But you could also kind of go down a different direction, say, well, I'm a cleric over here and a warlock over here, and I've now got these, War of the Spirit going on. And, if you go down that road, you're going to get spells from both, you're going to get powers from both, and you could have a little bit of fun and imagine, twice the role-playing potential when you've got both powers vying for what direction you should be going in.
Yeah, the Warlock is a great class for multiclassing. You have Palocks, you have Sorlocks. Like they come up with class match names because it is so good for it. And in all fairness too, when we say something isn't really as mechanically interesting or viable as something else, that doesn't mean it's not fun to play. We're not saying you shouldn't play these things and you can't have a good time playing them. I've played several Warlocks. I think usually I do multi-class with them. The Oath of the Ancients and the Fey Patron is a great example of one that I would love to play. A Servant of the Earl King would be a lot of fun. Could be all about the hunt. Or all about the hunt and the wild hunt, I should say, which is an amazing concept as well. So there's a lot of fun things you can do with it. But I guess with that, what are you folks doing with your Warlocks? How do you make your Warlocks stand out? How do you do more than just go Eldritch Blast every round? I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Before we leave, let me take a moment to invite you to join Nerdarchy, the adventuring party over on Patreon. What can I expect over there, Ted?
We're creating products for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons that both players and DMs alike can drop right into their game.
But that's not all. We do monthly giveaways, and our patrons are automatically entered.
We do a weekly hangout with our patrons and more.
So quest on down to the description, join the Nerdarchy adventuring party. Until next time,
Stay nerdy.